Tonight, the red-hot Utah Jazz, they've won 9 in a row. They'll be home to host the Spurs. And after a crazy week...
Vito Stellino. How are you doing, my friend?
Good.
Anyway, this is Marky over here in Johnson City, Tennessee. Or actually, I guess it's Irwin, but the Tri-Cities. I'm from Johnson City, you see. So, there we go. Let's get you on here. We're going to turn on the music. And...
What'd you say?
I said I got to turn on my bumper music. That's all.
Okay.
And then I'll give you a introduction here. For more than 50 years, Vito Stellino has covered the National Football League and a lot of other sports, ranging from, I guess you've covered everybody from Al Kaline to Jacksonville Dolphins, Atlantic Sun basketball. He has a website, VitoStellino.com, and not only is he been recognized by the Pro Football Hall of Fame as in their writers' wing, but he votes on the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Here to tell us about what went on in the war room is Vito Stellino, and he's been a longtime friend of the show. Vito, I do want to, before we begin, though, since you're based there in Jacksonville, and you, obviously the Jaguars are the team that you follow the most now. Is Blake Bortles going to make it, or do you think that the Jaguars bring in a new quarterback for 2018?
I think there's a good chance that he will be their quarterback in 2018, simply because they don't have an alternative right now. They made a mistake last year. They should have drafted Deshaun Watson instead of Leonard Fournette, and so now now. What would change things if they go out and sign Kirk Cousins? That would make then. But except for him, I don't know that Drew Brees is going to come on the market, and so I think that the odds are that almost by default they'll get a young quarterback starting to groom it, and Bortles will at least start the season.
So you're thinking perhaps, but no, outside of Cousins, you don't foresee potentially a trade for Eli Manning, something of a reunion with Tom Coughlin, nothing of that nature.
I kind of don't think so. I mean, with a new coach, I'm not sure the Giants now want to get rid of Eli.
Mm-hmm.
He's had some rocky years recently, but he's still big with the Giant fan base, and I don't know what they want for him. So, you never say never anything, but I would be surprised if that happens.
Well, now I want to switch the focus to the war room of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And, I love the Pro Football Hall of Fame. You've been recognized as a writer. Perhaps this is an unprofessional thing for me to say. I've been recognized, Vito, as a fan. I could tell you about that. They used to have a Visa Hall of Fans, and they said, who is this Steelers fan that drives 141 miles one way just to the nearest sports bar to watch them on TV and all of this? Well, of course, people know on this show, that's who I grew up rooting for, the team that you covered way back in the 70s. But I do want to try to maintain professionalism and not be the Steelers homer on this show, certainly not in the Tri-Cities, Tennessee area. But Vito, I mentioned this just sort of as a segue. The Pro Football Hall of Fame, it is a different kind of a vote because you have to have 4 players in or figures in every class, but it's maximized at 8 figures. Whereas, let's say the Baseball Hall of Fame, it's a strict percentage vote. Get 75%, you're in, you're on the ballot for 10 years. Can you tell us a little bit on how the Hall of Fame vote works? It's in pro football. I know you all meet. There's about 60-odd different writers. Different writers make presentations for players. And a certain percentage has to come about. Take us into the war room. What's the Pro Football Hall of Fame vote like?
Well, to start with, we have 2 votes even before we get to the Hall of Fame meeting. First, there's 100 or so guys that are on the ballot, and anybody
yeah.
you want to,
Sure.
for that initial ballot. But it's, mostly guys who've, had Pro Bowls and good players and that kind of thing. So anyway, first we whittled down to 25. And then we have a second vote that is either by email or mail. And then we mail it to 15. And then of those 15, we get in the room and we discuss all 15. Now also there's a senior candidate and contributor candidates. This year there are 3 of those. They're also discussed separately. They're named by a committee which discusses the guys who are on the ballot or have been nominated for that. So anyway, we discuss all 15, and then we have a vote to cut it to 10. Then there's a second vote to cut it to 5, and then at the final 5, you have to have 80% of the vote to get elected. But in reality, if you make the final 5, it's very unusual for a player to be rejected at that point. So usually the final 5 get in, and that's been kind of the pattern in recent years. So even though we don't know who gets elected when we leave the room, because they don't tell us, they want to announce it on their show, we know who the final 5 are, and we know there's a pretty good chance that those final 5 are going to be in the Hall of Fame.
Well, let me go into the War Room, and one of the feel-good stories of this year's ballot was that Jerry Kramer finally made it. Jerry Kramer seemed to be for football what, let's say, Gil Hodges was to baseball. There's always that argument, why isn't Gil Hodges in the Hall of Fame? Well, Jerry Kramer seemed to be that figure. Why did it take so long for Kramer, who I might argue was the 3rd most recognizable name of the old Packers players under Lombardi after Starr and Nitschke? Why did it take so long for one of the great guards of the NFL to make the Hall of Fame?
Well, to start with, being recognized does not mean you're the best. Forrest Gregg was certainly a better offensive lineman than
Good
Jerry
point.
Kramer was.
Good point.
That's not really a main consideration. It's been so long now. He was on the ballot, many times. Believe it or not, there's some feelings. Some people think, and he even came up this time. Well, we got enough Packers in the '60s in the Hall of Fame. We have to put another one in. That type of thing. And maybe some feelings that he was very recognized, but he wasn't as good as his reputation. So that's hard to quantify. But for whatever reason, he just never was voted in. Of course, and the times he wasn't voted in, maybe he was going against very good classes. It's not like we vote up or down all 15 guys. You're going to put this guy in, yes or no? We cut it to 10 and to 5. So, because they like to have like a steady stream of people getting in. They don't want 15 getting in one year and 3 the next, that type of thing. But, it's kind of a mystery because the people that rejected him years ago, most of them are not there. In fact, I think I was one of the few people in the room who actually ever saw him play live, so now you have a voting panel that has to go by reputation and what they've heard, and they tend to give the benefit of the doubt to the selection committee for the old timers, the senior committee, because they spend a lot of time evaluating the candidates. They bring in a couple players of the past to give their opinions and stuff like that. And so I think at this point, people figured, well, it's kind of time to put him in. And as you say, he was certainly one of the most famous, because of his books and because of the instant replay block. What people don't know is, the third down when they started that quarterback sneak, and had there were like 13 seconds left, had he been stopped, they would have had trouble lining up for a 4th down play.
Sure.
And in fact, in the CBS truck, they told installed the instant replay cameras to isolate the receivers because they thought they passed on third down and then it didn't complete. They could run or pass on fourth down. But it turned out the cameras by this time were frozen in place, shooting straight ahead. Excuse me. So they got a perfect shot of Kramer making the block. Although Ken Bowman, who was right next to him, also had a big block on that play too, and he was never recognized. At the time, Kramer supposedly said that Bowman will let the old man have his day in the sun, and so Bowman never got the recognition he deserved on that play too. It was really a two-team or two-player block. But anyway, that and his books, he became very famous for that era. And the Packers were also the first great team of the TV age.
Sure.
When pro football became bigger on TV, and they had I think it was started in 1962. They started a league-wide program or TV contract. Up till then, 2 or 3 teams had their own TV contracts. And that was one thing Roselle did was combine the contracts, and that helped make the game more popular. And so they became more famous than, say, the Cole teams of the 50s with Unitas. The Lions with Bobby Lane won 3 titles. Tobin got one of them when Lane got hurt. And Otto Graham and the Browns were in the title game the first 6 years in the NFL, won 3 of them. And they also won 4 in the old AAFC, so they had 7 championships in 10 years.
Oh, yeah, I look at I talk about it on here. I realize there were only 12 teams back then, but the man played 10 straight championships. I mean, to me, it would be similar to going to 10 straight conference titles today. Graham never played in a season in which he didn't play for a championship. That's incredible to me, even if there was only 12 teams.
Oh, yeah, no question. But I say, again, in that era, pro football was not as big as it is today. I mean, in 1946, the Browns had their first black players. Well, actually, the NFL had black players in the 30s, and then they kind of had like a 13-year period where they quietly resegregated. And anyway, so there was Bill Willis and Marion Motley. They were the 46 team of the Browns. But those 2 guys have never to this day gotten anywhere near the attention that Jackie Robinson did, just because in those days baseball just drowned out the sun. It was it was such a huge sport. People today have trouble realizing how big baseball was. It was baseball and everything else after that. So the Browns of that era never got to do it. In fact, a lot of these Patriot fans say, "Oh, nobody's ever done what we've done." And I say, "Wait a second, you won 5 and 17. The 49ers won 5 and 14. Lombardi won 5 and 7. The Browns either they won 3 and 6 or 7 and 10.
Yeah, depending on what you're looking at.
There's a tendency to forget history these days. Everything today is like, well, there's never been anything like this before, and that's certainly not true. But anyway, that's another.
Yeah, I've always, when people start talking about all time, then you have to have a real good knowledge of history, in my opinion. The other thing that all time to me, Vito, and we've had this conversation, Vito Stellino, that I think it has an automatic qualification of a bygone era, and sort of really does equate the history with the contemporary, maybe in some ways that it should, maybe in some ways that it shouldn't. Because, you look at, let's just say, football. I'll give you a guy who's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame very few of my listeners will have ever heard of, Wilbur Pete Henry, who played for the Canton Bulldogs. This is a while back. He was a giant. He was 250 pounds. That guy doesn't make the NFL today. So equating, that era to you've got to understand, a few things, and saying all time, sometimes I'm like, do you really understand what that means? When you start saying all time. Anyway, Vito Stellino, I want to go into the Hall of Fame vote here. Now, I know that various writers from their hometowns make presentations. Did you make the presentation for Tony Baselli?
No, Sam Kavaris, one of the local TV stations. He's the Jacksonville selector. I'm an at-large selector. There are 48 total voters overall, one for each team, and then there's two players, Lofton and Dan Fouts, and then a group of at-large selectors. I'm one of the at-large selectors.
See, now, could you as an at-large selector ever make the nominating case for a Jacksonville Jaguar player, or for that matter, a Steeler player? If L.C. Greenwood, who you covered, was up for the senior committee, I mean, I can't think of someone better than yourself to make that presentation. Would it automatically be Ed Bouchette because he is the Steelers writer?
Yes, but I mean, I can chime in, or any of the 48 can chime in on, or the other 47 on any player. It's not like the hometown guy makes the presentation and then you vote. They have discussion of players, and depending on how controversial the pick is, some guys they can discuss for an hour. A guy like Ray Lewis, obviously, they did not discuss that long because it was kind of obvious he was going to get in. But yeah, no, any of the 48 can chime in with their thoughts.
Now, one of the things, so I've always asked this, when you look at an Isaac Bruce, who is a St. Louis Ram, I mean, to me, a Howard Balzer, who's based in St. Louis, would be much better trying to make that presentation than whoever is covering the L.A. Rams right now who gets the vote. How does that work out? Is somebody brought in from St. Louis? Who nominated or who made the argument for Isaac Bruce?
Well, Howard Balzer is on the committee, and frankly, I can't remember whether he made the presentation or not. But I actually think Bruce is as worthy as
Terrell Owens,
and,
Randy Moss.
And Randy Moss. But he was kind of a quiet guy, never got a lot of attention, played an offense that, Torrey Holt was on it too. And I think he gets overlooked. I certainly spoke up for Bruce, and one of my points is if he gets, he's been overlooked now about 4 years in a row. Didn't he make the Final 10 this year? Not only he has as many yards, or within a couple hundred yards, receiving yards of those two players, but he made a game-winning catch in the Super Bowl and played in the second Super Bowl. But it's a very inexact science. Charisma is involved and that type of thing, and so the other two guys got in, and Isaac didn't make the top 10. I think eventually he'll get in, but I think he's being kind of shortchanged.
It's interesting. I know that one of the criteria, I don't believe it is looked down for the Football Hall of Fame, but legitimately the Baseball Hall of Fame asks you to consider character. Now, how often is character considered? Well, I can ask for you in your vote.
Well, technically we're only supposed to talk about or consider what they did on the field. That's the parameters. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, if a guy like Randy Moss who walked off the field during the game, and said, granted less than 15 seconds left, but he still walked off the field. Is that part of what he did in the field, or is that character, or what? So there is some kind of gray area there, but technically it's just what they did in the field is how they're supposed to be judged.
Yeah, I've always felt that even if you did reinstate for enshrinement, consider Pete Rose, the Cooperstown, with that character involvement, there were probably going to be 25% of the writers in today's era who would just say, no, we don't care. He's a singles hitter and he bet on baseball and he went to jail. I've always kind of felt that Rose would still have a tough time getting in because of that clause. We're talking to Vito Stellino, though, about the Football Hall of Fame, so I'm going to ask right now, if they ever get in, they got to go to the senior committee. Why didn't Joe Jacoby and Everson Walls make it this year?
Unfortunately for them, they didn't get. Well, Walls didn't get into the room until his 20th year this year. You're a modern day candidate harder to judge him. I mean, like Joe Gibbs made the argument that counter trade play where Jacoby pulls from left tackle all the way to the right side. He was a big, huge guy who was nimble enough to do that, and that was a key play in their offense. Should be considered, but unfortunately, Joe is now in the senior category unless the rules suddenly change. So it's unfortunate to say it's a very imprecise procedure, and also the competition is very stiff, and so neither one of me made the final 10.
Well, Vito Stellino, I do want to ask, in the case of Everson Walls, you had 57 interceptions. It seems to me that interceptions really aren't carried or with a lot of weight by you, the voters. I mean, it took forever for Dick LeBeau, I believe, is the third all-time interceptor in NFL history to make it. And really, I think that his assistant coaching, his defensive coordinator, is what probably ultimately got him in. You can discuss that if that's yeah or nay. Walls with 57 interceptions isn't in. Donnie Shell with, I think, 51 interceptions isn't in. Why are interceptions not considered with, as the stat for defensive backs?
Well, the crazy thing is some people feel, well, if you're intercepting a lot of passes, that means you're throwing at you. And so you can have fewer interceptions, but that means they weren't throwing at you. In the Shell's case, again, this is hard to believe, and I argue against this concept. There was actually a feeling that, well, they have enough Steelers of the 70s already in the Hall of Fame. And to me, Shell, Tony Dungy, who played with him, is a big proponent of Shell. And I think L.C. Greenwood was better than Carl Eller. But again, all those Steelers on defense made it. Well, already made that 4 of the 11 in the Hall of Fame. And it's almost like Steeler fatigue. But, I argue, when you win 4 in 6 years, there's no one else has ever done. You had 9, already had 9 Hall of Famers. That should count for something. But those two guys are, both gotten overlooked. So there are a lot of various reasons about why guys, get overlooked.
He's a Hall of Fame writer, and he's a Hall of Fame voter. He's Vito Stellino, one of the guys you could talk to all night. Jerry Bonkowski is up next to talk about the Daytona 500 coming up when we return on Tri-City Sports Now. I suddenly realized